listening to the Access Success Podcast, produced by AccessU, a division of Access Advertising and Public Relations. Hey, let's do something big. I'm your host, Rachel Schneider. Welcome to the Access Success Podcast, where we highlight important topics focused on education in every form it takes. Today, we're talking about how to succeed on the most popular social media platforms today, and also how to learn from them. Let me introduce you to Dr. Dean Browell, co-founder and head of research for Feedback, a social media research firm in Richmond, Virginia. He also teaches at the graduate level for Virginia Commonwealth University's School of Business. He's a board member and instructor for the University of Richmond's Institute on Philanthropy. And before all that, Browell spent 8 years at Ferrum College as the director of public relations. So he brings a wealth of insights to the AccessU faculty on new and emerging digital media and how it impacts the world of higher education. Dean, thanks for joining us. Tell us more about Feedback and how you guys analyze data.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been around about 13 years, and we apply behavioral science to the online space. So we use folks with anthropology backgrounds, psychology backgrounds to look at online behavior and then pull out the key insights of how people are making decisions, how they're talking, how they're interacting with one another. That could also mean, for example, validating personas. If you're a group that uses personas, very, very much for your messaging or for how you think about your audiences, maybe about validating those. But yeah, we do that both on a sort of a project level where we might say, okay, here's how people have talked historically, here's how they're talking right now. But it's something that can also be tracked, where it can be, okay, here's how these trends are changing. Interesting, they talked about this semester in a particular way, and trying to really understand how that can ebb and flow, right? I mean, we are a seasonal business in higher education, and understanding how that ebbs and flows is really important. So yeah, we've had this about 13 years, and I'd say healthcare and higher education are really our two big focuses. And my background specifically, I've got a PhD in higher ed leadership, but really looking at how different generations interact online. So I've been lucky enough to be old enough to see us focus on lots of generations over the last 20 some odd years. And so I think that's why I definitely feel it's important that we step back every now and then, because as a generation shifts underneath our feet, and they can pretty fast, we want to make sure that we don't miss that beat.
So let's go ahead and delve into why you guys put together the Social Media Centers of Excellence blogs. What was the goal when creating those?
Yeah, so the goal it's actually pretty simple, because it's that even though I think that some marketing departments, PR departments have a handle on how to project content onto certain channels, I don't think we're really all that adept at listening to those same channels. And I mean that beyond just, reacting if somebody left a comment on a channel that you own, but as in like actually looking at how different generations are actually interacting with those channels. I mean, I know, especially in higher education, I mean, for example, YouTube, they probably had a YouTube account since they were attracting and retaining millennials, from an audience type. So now they're attracting and retaining Gen Z. So has their strategy changed? I mean, I hope so. But more than that, I think it's just really about really looking hard at how these channels are being used and letting that maybe change your approach, or at least just getting informed.
And how can this help marketers, especially when they know how to use social media and what its effect could be on their audiences?
Yeah, well, I think that if nothing else, it gives them probably an incredible insight into exactly what their students and employees might be doing. And honestly, I think on a really small level, it just helps them not be tone deaf to how it's actually being used. I mean, for example, one of the things that we saw across the board in many different channels is just the concept of like the day in a life. The way that the students would talk about it in those terms, just even pure language, right? I mean, that'll help what you're putting out into the water get accepted a lot more. But also, I think just being realistic about how different audiences are using these channels, I think will give you a much better sense of where are the content gaps looking even in the comments and saying, here's the question everyone keeps asking. So why don't we answer it, with our messaging? So I think that, on the basis level, it would really help from a content perspective, but I think it can really help even with just an approach and strategy perspective as well.
So I guess let's just rip the Band-Aid off on one of the most popular, or I should say probably the most popular social media platform right now, especially for Gen Z, that a lot of people talk about, but some people in marketing tend to be a little weary about, is TikTok, because it can seem very intimidating. But break it down for us.
Yeah, so I'll start by really breaking down, how is it really being used right now? I mean, it as a platform, I think it's one of those that either everyone's really intimidated by, or we think we have it figured out, right? It's like really there's no in between, right? Either it's, hey, I totally understand TikTok, or I am completely intimidated by it. And so I think that the first thing to do is to say, okay, it's actually not about you, like me. It's not about me personally and how I might use it. It's first taking a step back and saying, okay, how is it being used, especially through the lens of higher education? And often I think that with higher ed, whenever we get into we find a new channel, we just sort of like rush in and start posting things without necessarily looking at how it's being used. And sure, we might get it right by doing some fun dances on TikTok or whatever the case may be. But if you look a little bit deeper, how TikTok's actually being used is way more interesting. For example, when we were doing the studies, we found that how on TikTok, community colleges were being referred to as a bit of a life hack. The idea that going to community college is a way to save money, save time, and finding students who are articulating that, hashtagging it with life hack was fascinating. But the other thing about TikTok to keep in mind is that it's not just the videos, it's the comments. And so the comments on those videos were fascinating and really telling of the struggle that some potential students and prospective students were going through about trying to decide about whether to go to community college or not. And so here you had this like pretty rich discussion going on a platform that I bet if you asked most people would say, oh, it's like videos. That's all it is. And to find that kind of interactivity shows that there's a community learning, looking, listening. And I think that's really important. The day in the life thing also being obviously a big part of TikTok too. And I think what may be frustrating to the marketer is that their brand doesn't always show up. That it's the brand may be there in a sweatshirt, it might be there as a, pennant on the back of the wall or a poster, but it may not be tagged for the brand. It may be tagged for the town that the college is in. It may be tagged for, it may even be tagged based on a nickname for the college, and that's assuming that it's even tagged at all, even though you might appear in the video, as in you maybe even be said out loud. But I think that can be a frustrating thing too, because this idea that, we could be out there, we could end up one of our current students could have thousands and thousands of views on a video, and it may not show up on our radar, in terms of like a Google News alert. So I think that's another part of this too, is just really being able to get in there and understand, who's using it and how are they using it.
And then after understanding that, what are some of the most important things that organizations and institutions can do with a platform like this, even if they don't know everything there is to know about it yet, or maybe they aren't even ready to create content?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think that the very quick, thing I will always say is listen and just continue to listen. And I think that will be your best informant for when you are ready to step in. But the second thing is, and I used to say this with Pinterest all the time. We'd get questions of, hey, we should be on Pinterest. And my first question would be, if you should be on Pinterest, you're already on it. As in other people are pinning you. And that's like my same feeling about when it comes to TikTok and really any new channel, which is know how you're already there. And that will give you the stepping stones for how you should interact there. So for example, if how you as a brand, as an institution are on TikTok by someone else putting you on is about like day in the life, type videos, then I think that when you start your own channel and you start posting videos, focus on day in the life. Maybe look at what demographics aren't represented, what majors aren't represented in the current day in the life videos, and use that as a way to not mimic, but find students that can contribute, but also fill the gaps, right? So that more than just one type of student is represented, more than just a very sort of narrow representation, but sort of play in the sandbox the same way. And I think that will always garner you at least in a pass. When people see institutions and brands on social media, there's always that potential cringe moment. So, it's sort of avoid the cringe by, mimicking and going along with what your crowd is doing.
And then speaking of the crowd, when I was growing up, the crowd was on a platform that created longer videos, and that was YouTube. That was like the biggest thing, was you get home from school and you look up YouTube videos and what's trending and music videos. So how has YouTube changed over the years, and are people still using it as much as they're using things like Instagram Reels and TikTok?
Yeah, so the short answer is they absolutely are still using it. And in fact, I think the difference is that the use has just changed a little bit. So I was actually a little surprised in our recent research to find so many students vlogging, basically video blogging. Now, I will say one thing that has changed dramatically, and I used to love picking on the fact that like YouTube comments are like the lowest form of life on the internet, like just YouTube commenters. And I still maintain that that's probably true in some cases. But what I really found fascinating was, again, just like we saw on TikTok, but actually way deeper, is that these day in the life videos and these vlogs that were also happening on YouTube, the comments were actually really robust. In fact, more robust than I would say any other channel, where people felt, and this is in part, I think, because of the anonymity that a YouTube, login can afford. But, people asking about, hey, how did you pick the school? What do you know about how this department is? Questions about financial aid. And so what it really showed me is that community is still alive and well. And part of that is that it's not necessarily about having a regular community in the same way that, say, Instagram is, where, you may have groups of friends following each other. It may not even be about subscribing to the person who's leaving videos, their vlog, their weekly vlog, or whatever it is as a college student, but that it may be more about someone who's interested in a school going onto Google and just searching for day in the life, blank college or blank university. And because YouTube is owned by Google, that's showing up in their sort of social search on Google. And they want to know, what does a current student say? And so it's making it very easy. And I think it's keeping YouTube very viable in that way. And it is sort of fascinating to watch then the people who post these videos about what it's like to go to school there, what their daily life is like, return to the comments and answer people and have these threads. So it actually has almost like a Reddit-like kind of quality to the comments on the videos themselves.
And how can that also be beneficial to the schools? Like you said, with TikTok, being aware of the comments, going through and seeing what the conversation is, but also when they might want to create their own content because they see what questions are being asked, does that give them a good pathway forward?
Absolutely. And also I would say too, if you can vet some of these videos, they may be great opportunities for you to highlight a video that's out there and share the link, or, in some way lift them up, put them in a playlist of videos of current students, or students of a particular major, for example. But I think, the exact same thing. The one thing I will say about YouTube that you just need to be incredibly aware of is we are talking about, something owned by one of the single biggest internet companies. And so it has a way larger impact, way more discoverable, I would say, than, say, some of the other channels that we're talking about.
And with it being so discoverable, how can people optimize their own videos to try and get more of a following and make sure that they're funneling people into the information that they want to spread out into the world with their messaging?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think some of it is just the basics that has always been true on YouTube, which is tag everything. Make sure location is on every video. honestly, I would say if it's like just like an announcement video, turn off comments. But if it's something where you're really digging into like a subject matter, or if you're featuring someone, let the comments stay on. But I think that really it's the tagging, and also in the really rich descriptions. If you could transcribe what's in the video and put it in the description, it's not because anyone reads the description. It's because Google owns YouTube. And so you want that video as discoverable as possible. And I think that's key on YouTube. And the last note I will say is using playlists, because that really helps other people find the same kinds of content. For example, Gen Z right now, when they're making their college decisions, they do want that day in the life. They do want those deciding videos where people are explaining, here's how I made my decision, here's why I chose, X university. And I think that having, for example, a playlist of videos of people who have made their decision, your school, makes it easy for someone just to start the playlist and watch all the videos in a row. And so I think just making it easy for that content to be discoverable, I think is a big one on YouTube, especially.
And speaking of exploring content, discovering content, and especially tagging people and hashtagging, we see that a lot with Instagram. How can colleges make the most of their Instagram accounts?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, Instagram is one of those that I honestly think it kind of does it all right now. It is a place where those videos, lie. It's a place where that comments and that engagement is happening, and it's more of a true community. With TikTok, we're talking about more of like an interest-based following, as in like, you start clicking on a few hashtags and TikTok grabs that and makes that your algorithm for the next week. It's why, if you see one kind of TikTok video and you bother to like it, you're going to see about 5 more very similar to it. I mean, that algorithm works real hard on TikTok. On Instagram, it works hard too, but the difference is you're much more likely to follow people that you stumble upon, that you like the content of. And so it just creates a little bit more of an insular community. So likewise, I think, from the standpoint of listening, is follow the breadcrumb trails on Instagram, right? If you have some people who are, they are current students, or whatever the case may be, and they are talking about their lives, whether it's in, story posts, whether it's in an occasional reel, whether it's in, some photo posts, have them be on your radar to check out. Look at who follows them. That may give you a great example of their influence. And I don't mean influencer like Fire Festival, influencers. I mean, like truly as in, notice that the people who are engaging are, in high school, are, current students, what kind of makes up their mini communities. Likewise, then in terms of the institution using Instagram, this is one of those where I think we have to be a little careful, because chances are you have been on Instagram for a little while. So it may be that you have sort of a typical approach and then you just like occasionally change it up when you learn something new. I think this is another one where I think it's really important to just take a moment, go off, kind of put what you do already off to the side for a second and really look at how are your prospective students using it? Are there things that you can mimic? I know this is not something you would typically think of, but think of it from the standpoint of your current students can teach you best practices. And I think kind of humbling yourself a little bit to understand this is how they're using it. And you can force feed the ideas that and the strategies that you have all you want. But if you can't mirror what they want out of Instagram, you will always just be that brand that sits there. You're a source of information, but you may not be something that they truly engage with or think of as something that helps them make their decision. And I think, as opposed to what they're clearly telling you is how they're making their decisions. And I think that's real important.
When it comes to interacting with students, how can colleges, universities, and organizations be more proactive about that? Because like you said, people might be tagging everything in their posts to get more interaction. So what are some of the best things that social media managers can do to make sure that they're still fostering that interaction and those partnerships and maybe using them for their advantage as well?
I think that's my gut feeling always at first is they want to interact with you last. They want to know what someone else thinks about you. Your website is great, and your website needs to have a lot of great information on it. But before they're going to even want that information, they're going to want to know, how does someone exactly like me choose you? Why would they choose you? And let me have to piecemeal it from several different people, right? Someone with the same interests, okay, someone with the same major, interest, someone with the same demographic makeup, does the campus look like me? They're only going to be able to trust the institution's approach and the institution's interactions, but so much. It doesn't mean they distrust you, but there's a certain point where you are trying to be all things to all people. And so what they want to know is very specifically, how are their peers, interacting with you and whatnot. So my first gut thing always is, your best bet is to use student ambassadors to answer these questions. Even if it's a student ambassador that's doing a takeover of your account, especially like on Instagram, I think is the best channel, where that really shines. But make them very available, right? Where they're interacting, they're the ones answering questions. The institution is great for pure information. That's very different, though, than the sort of more emotional connection of, someone like me made this choice to go there. And I think it can sometimes feel like a fine line. And I know that a brand kind of giving up that interaction, allowing someone else to do that for them, is not always a natural feeling. But sometimes that arm's length can really be the difference between whether somebody truly trusts, the information and trusts and makes their decision and feels really warm about it, than, say, feeling maybe a little turned off from the more institutional approach of always responding.
Is there anything else to be said about seemingly the demand for authenticity now more than ever? Because I've just noticed with the fashion and beauty world of Instagram, there seems to be more of that demand for less filters, just more honesty when posting of how somebody got to where they are. Does that go for institutions as well when they are talking to their students about what it's really like to go there?
Absolutely. 100%. And I think that authenticity is key. And I mean that even in terms of a vulnerability from the institution itself, and I think that's where, on many levels, on many different subjects, whether we're talking about, underrepresented and marginalized groups, that it's not just a statement. Show me what the practice is. Like, show me some transparency of what you're doing to change and enhance and represent your community. I think that's even true in terms of what I think sometimes can feel like this, like, high wall. And I'm trying not to use ivory tower, because I know that gets used for academic, institutions a lot. But, sometimes there sometimes feels like this high wall of vagueness around cost, around, exactly what the process is like for getting X, Y, or Z type of diploma, things like that. Anything you can do to sort of strip away the fog, right? And be transparent and authentic about what life is really like, I think is huge. Sometimes with liberal arts institutions, especially, there's this, sometimes in an attempt to express all of the potential avenues that you can go in a liberal arts institution, it ends up unfortunately making everyone look exactly the same. As in, like, everyone's saying yes to everything, every question you have, the answer is you can do that here. And that actually often comes across as like incredibly, like, not just inauthentic, but just an incredibly, just sort of like almost like a glaze, right? Like, just this idea that you're going to say yes to everyone means that there isn't anything that makes you distinct. And it also means that, like, you don't have any flaws, like there's nothing that you don't do well. And I think that allowing your students to say that, not have a student trash you on a post, but for your student to be able to talk about, look, I prefer small classes. That's why I went here. It may mean that this school doesn't have a football team, right? Because of the size or because of the type, but that's okay, because that's not why I came here. And I think that kind of talk is something that we are often, as marketers, ostensibly trained not to do, right? Is sort of just don't mention those things. But that's exactly what many students want to hear, because they may end up choosing you because of those differences. And they appreciate that vulnerability, that authenticity, and it can really, really resonate with them. And here's the trick. If you don't do it, they will get it from someone else. And that's exactly what's happening right now, which is that they are busy talking to peers because they can get what they feel is a more real story than they might get going just to the institution's website on the first shot.
Absolutely. Well, Dean, you've given us so much to think about in terms of how people are using social media today, especially when it comes to interacting with colleges and universities. Is there anything else you want to mention about things that institutions can do to make sure that they are interacting and being their authentic brand while not looking too polished and too branded, to the point, like you said, that it's kind of glazing over all of the things that may make them unique, and just being honest about their attributes?
Yeah, I would just say, it's really about listening first. And I think that if you listen first and you take seriously what you're hearing, you'll understand how much that's why and how much that's influencing the people you're trying to talk to. And I also mean that whether you're talking about alums, whether you're talking about, prospective students, all of your stakeholders, even internally and employees. I mean, one of the things we didn't talk about, but in all of these channels, your employees are also posting. And they're posting on what it's like to work there, and I think that's it. All of this, I think, really just comes to say there are going to be some unique situations that you're going to find if you listen. And even though, this is hopefully very helpful for people to hear from a podcast perspective, one of the things I actually really want to get across is not every situation fits every college. And I know we're often looking for best practices, but honestly, some of the best practices are probably right in front of your face, truly underneath, under your nose, in terms of what your students and your stakeholders are doing. And it may not be the same as what a competitor, their groups are doing. The good news is you could also listen to your competitors' students too. Find out what those differences are. It may actually give you some ideas of content. But I think sometimes I know I've been there. I was the PR and marketing director for a small private college for many years, and I totally get it. We all have too many hats. All we do is put out fires all day. But I also think that the taking a moment to step back and listen, I think not only will help you kind of completely refresh your thinking, but it also might help you find out, to not do some stuff you've been doing. And that may end up saving you a lot of time too, is to not, it may give you some signals of things that you can stop doing and put the energies in the right things. And I know it sounds true, a platitude to say, but I really do feel that, listening first is the antidote, I think, to sort of this, just sort of trying to be all things to all people.
Well, Dean, thank you again for being able to speak with us today. If people do want to learn more about feedback and what you guys are doing, kind of plug yourselves. Where can they find out more information?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find us at discoverfeedback.com. And feel free to reach out to me at dean@discoverfeedback.com. And or find us on LinkedIn, and we're on the social medias. Just like everybody else on Facebook and whatnot. But yeah, just please feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to talk to you. And, we work with lots of other great partners. We only do what we do, on a research side, but, that's where we really interface well with folks like AccessU and others that, really can help not just take the insights, but then put them into action.
Dean, I feel like I've learned so much just on this episode. Thanks so much again for your time. For anybody listening, if you'd like to learn more about social media centers of excellence, Dean has multiple blogs on our website, AccessU.com. You can check them out there with more details all about TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. Dean, thanks again.
You bet. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the Access Success Podcast, produced by AccessU, a division of Access Advertising and Public Relations. Find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram to keep up with what the world of education needs to hear, at AccessU Agency, and connect with us at AccessU.com. Let's do something big.